I gave my sister the life savings our parents had trusted us both to protect. She used it all to support and indulge a boyfriend who was two-faced and unfaithful, and the fallout cost us not only money but trust, family cohesion, and many months of sleep. This is the story of how the mistake happened, how it rippled outward, the confrontation that finally forced choices, the small victories, and the compromises that followed, and what I learned about boundaries, accountability, and rebuilding. We grew up small and careful. Our parents had taught us that money wasn't something to flash, but something to shelter and steward, a safety rope for emergencies and a key to modest freedom later in life. When they died, there was a modest nest egg, not life-changing, but enough that if managed sensibly, it would cover some debts, help finish a degree, or allow one small, important investment like a reliable car or a down payment on a tiny apartment. My sister and I argued and cried and ultimately agreed to pool it. She would use a portion to finish college. I would use a portion to stabilize my housing, and we both would keep a small joint emergency fund. We made spreadsheets. We set up separate accounts. We promised each other we'd call before making major withdrawals. For years, that trust worked. We miscounted grocery money and covered each other, but the rules held because they had to. We were both, in our way, survivors. Then she met Jay, who arrived like a hurricane. Charming, quick with flattery, an instant dramatic presence in her life. He had a bright smile, an apartment that smelled of incense, and a constant stream of I'm just one step away stories about opportunities he didn't quite have. He liked to borrow things, ask for last-minute favors, and always hinted at grand plans that needed just a little cash to make them real. My sister said he made her feel seen. I wanted her to be happy. That turned out to be the hinge point. Spoke. The first withdrawals were small. A gift here, a train ticket there, a loan he promised to pay back. She called them loans, but they had the air of romance, a secret between them. Then slowly the withdrawals accelerated and the excuses grew thicker. A joint savings transfer for an emergency fund to hold for a week, while the bank processed a wire became a pattern of him being in sudden crisis. A phone stolen, an urgent ticket home, a job application that if only he had $50 more would secure him a contract. He urged secrecy. It will freak your sister out, and my sister complied because she loved him and because love for her felt like responsibility. I noticed the balance dropping and asked. She laughed it off, called me cautious and small, and said she had everything under control. It was not control. She sold sentimental things, the little watch our father left, a box of letters I'd sworn we'd never sell, and told me they were for an apartment deposit. She signed documents for him, co-signed for short-term loans, and at one point even remortgaged a small inherited thing in a panic. The pattern that emerges when someone is being exploited is often subtle. They justify, rationalize, compartmentalize, and shame themselves into silence. I asked her to pause. She said she couldn't, that cutting him off would wreck him, that she was the only one he had. I believed her because she was my sister. I also failed her by giving her the benefit of the doubt, instead of acting sooner. I gave them the money, the telling detail that turned the private drama into a family catastrophe. In a moment of desperation, when her name was on a looming late fee notice and he promised to sell something next week and pay it back, she asked if I'd transfer our shared savings into her account, just for the weekend. I rationalized it. It was still in our joint control. It would be back. We were family, not banks, so I transferred. Instead of a weekend, it became weeks, then months. Instead of a sale, it became a stream of transactions. Dinners, online purchases, payoffs to people whose names she could barely spell. Meanwhile, the boyfriend's infidelity, the thing that would later look obvious to everyone, was quietly playing out. Late-night messages, hidden accounts, a woman showing up at an acquaintance's party and hugging him in a way that left no doubt, and gossip traveling faster than our denials. Confrontations happened privately. I texted screenshots, she deleted them. I called, she didn't pick up. I showed up at her apartment and found him there with a stranger in the hall. She would tell me it was nothing, that I was jealous and controlling, the family divided along fault lines that love and anger made. There are 3 turning points that I remember as if they were milestones on an otherwise foggy road: the discovery, the ultimatum, and the reconstruction. Discovery came when a long-avoided creditor called my phone and read the balance that had been drained. When I checked the joint account and saw the final figure, an amount that felt like a punch in the stomach, seeing it in numbers removed any plausible deniability. I sat on our kitchen floor and cried not just for the money, but for the trust evaporated. The ultimatum came weeks later, after covert attempts to reclaim funds failed. I gave her a choice: seek help and account for what had happened, or I would take steps to protect myself, freeze our shared accounts, involve the bank, and if needed, seek legal remedies. I know ultimatum sounds harsh, but living in ambiguity for months had become its own form of theft. The secretary of my life had been emptied, and I needed a door shut. She was furious, convinced I had betrayed her like he had. He left for a while, then came back apologizing in grand gestures, a bouquet with an apology note he'd paid for with her own credit card, and she let him back in. That was when I realized the problem wasn't just the money. The problem was that love can be a lens that distorts judgment until reality is unreadable. The resolution was neither cinematic nor perfectly tidy. We did not go to court for dramatic reclaiming of every dollar. We did not have a reconciliatory family dinner under fairy lights where all wounds were cleaned with words. What happened instead was a sequence of small, steady steps. First, I protected what remained. I transferred what savings I could into accounts the bank could not touch without both our signatures, and set up alerts. I changed passwords. I documented transactions. I met with a financial counselor to learn how to rebuild, to prioritize debt, to stop using credit for emergency legs, to start a new habit of weekly money check-ins. I also imposed a boundary. I would not be complicit in transfers or loans to him anymore. Second, she faced consequences. Late fees, angry phone calls from vendors, the shame of losing friends who felt lied to, and the individual reckoning of sleeping on a floor that had once felt safe and now felt like a classroom of hard lessons. For a while, she oscillated between anger and gratitude. Sometimes she lashed out, blaming me for not being supportive. Other times she begged me for help in paying off a small loan whose payments she could not make because the boyfriend had emptied her savings and disappeared with his own agenda. The first time she asked me to help pay a single overdue bill, I said yes, with strict conditions, a written budget, counseling, and a signed plan for restitution over time. I insisted on seeing receipts. I insisted she meet with the counselor and block contact with him. She agreed slowly as people change when they are ready to change. We also opened difficult conversations about trust and forgiveness. Rebuilding money is technical. Budgets, automatic transfers, emergency envelopes. But rebuilding relationships required sitting in rooms where we both cried and listened. I had to explain how the choice to give the money had been seen by other family members as enabling, and she had to explain the void that made his attention feel like oxygen. We both took responsibility in different ways. She for allowing herself to be exploited, and me for not acting sooner, for letting our family rules bend. We set new rules going forward. Any withdrawal over a certain small threshold required a text explanation and a 48-hour cooling-off period. We created a separate e-recovery fund where small automatic deposits would go to repair what was lost. And we agreed to quarterly honest check-ins that were more than fiscal audits. They were mini therapy sessions for a family learning to be financially and emotionally honest. The concrete outcomes: the money was not fully replaced, but it did not ruin us. We paid down debt slowly. She finished school by taking a part-time job and a scholarship. I took on extra freelance work for a stretch and learned to say no to large, risky loans to family. He eventually left, as men like him often do, not because he'd been confronted with morality, but because he found another stage. He resurfaced months later in stories from mutual acquaintances, and she finally named him in the past tense. The harder outcomes were less visible. Trust was thinner. Family gatherings had awkward pauses where jokes once lived. Forgiveness needed to be earned, not assumed. The human wins were quieter, a return of mutual respect when she made the first repayment installment with a handshake and tears, the small victory of her setting up a new, tiny savings account that she managed entirely herself. The daily relief of automatic transfers that meant we would not be blindsided again. She entered therapy and learned to identify patterns where love had been mistaken for neediness, where caretaking became codependency. I learned to balance compassion with boundaries, to understand that helping someone does not have to mean enabling self-harm. If a reader looks for takeaways beyond the drama, here are the durable ones. Keep clear, written agreements for shared funds, set hard boundaries and enforce them early. Make financial transparency clean, alerts, shared docs, two-person sign-offs for sizable movements. Recognize that emotional manipulation often gets dressed up as romance, and when enabling behaviors appear, the family must ask, are we protecting someone or the behaviors that hurt them? Also, when trust breaks, restoration is possible but requires intentional acts, restitution plans, financial counseling, and therapeutic work. Forgiveness without accountability is fragile. Accountability without compassion is cruel. Whatever balance a family chooses, it should be explicit. If I could go back, I would still help my sister with empathy but set firmer guardrails. No single person withdrawals above a modest amount, insistence on third-party verification if someone outside the family claims emergency. Earlier involvement of a counselor to help her parse love from obligation. Most of all, I would say that saving a relationship sometimes means refusing to save bad patterns. In the months and years since that transfer, we rebuilt slowly, collected small wins, and learned the difference between romantic stories that ask for everything and real love that preserves the other person's autonomy and dignity. The money taught us more than numbers. It taught us boundaries, how to face shame, how to make restitution when possible, and how to keep loving someone even when we refuse their bad choices.